Greetings, everyone who decided to join this channel again, and this is the second episode of my podcast, Divine Destiny of Souls. So in this series of episodes, I'm continuing to tell the story of my shamanic awakening and how I was guided to become a healer of souls. So our story in the first episode ended with me moving in with Veronica and starting to live together in April of 2010. And quite soon enough, we started to realize the depthness of our connection. Like we both acknowledged that we remember the eyes of each other. We both acknowledged that these different clairvoyant and spiritual sort of understanding of who we are to each other and how we connect. Like her sort of recognizing me on the photo in the social media and sort of like having this thought that I will be her husband, and me sort of understanding that I somehow know her. And slowly we started to sort of unravel these sort of understandings of our essence, and we both kind of accepted it as a truth, so like we never doubted it. We just didn't know that like we would be guided on this like a unique spiritual path, and that all these elements would be of big significance. And so in April of 2010, I got a job working on a train that goes from Saint Petersburg to Moscow. It was a high-speed train that they purchased from Siemens in Germany, and had this like a route, usual trip on the regular train between St. Petersburg and Moscow is around 8 hours. And this train took like 4 hours. So it was really like a big breakthrough. And the job basically, I started as a waiter, and then I was promoted to be a bartender, and then eventually became like a manager of the catering team on the train. And I went to that job just because of the money. Like most of the editing jobs or like office jobs would pay you around like $400 or $500 at the time, and that job paid like $1,500. And in a good month, it was even more than that. So that was the main reason. Like I needed to sort of like get on my feet, but at the same time, of course, I wanted to sort of have money for my new family, right? And understanding that, like around the June of 2010, I realized that Veronica never been outside of the Russia, and so I thought that like we just have to go somewhere, and it was that like just intuitive knowing that we have to go. And since by that time I was like my father took me to Paris once to the Disneyland. We went with the entire family, and there's like agreement that like if I would pass certain grades in ninth grade, that he would take us. And then we went to Italy as well on just like a bus trip. So these were my trips outside of Russia, and I also like been to Poland and Romania and Bulgaria, but Veronica never been like to Europe, and so I thought that it could be a great way for us to connect deeper, to have like a romantic trip, right? And so I was always continued to be called to Paris. It was something of significance for me, and I kind of like, well, let's go to Paris then. And so we bought the tickets, we bought the trip like for October of 2010, and we went there. And the significance of the Paris is actually, we realized it, of course, only later when we sort of discovered our past lives, but it was that kind of like a feeling that as you know a person, it was the same thing as that you know the town, or you know the land, you know the spirits of this place. Later turned out that we both, Veronica and I, were living in Paris in our previous lives and then the lives before that. So it was a kind of like a very important city for us. In both lives, we're never French, but it's like we still spent some years living in Paris, and it was always kind of like filled with important memories, important sort of realizations, important spiritual sort of perceptions. That's what Paris was always for us. Like, it's just something for our souls that kind of, I don't know, we just know the spirits of that land, right? Like, so eventually I kind of discovered it was the spirits of the River Seine. But yeah, some lands of Paris, and also like Luxembourg Park was also the spirits of that park is one of the most important spirits on my path as well. I communicate with them, like even on a distance, like living in Vancouver, for example. So we went there, and it was kind of like this, just knowing at that time, like we had a lot of conversations on our trip, like, and it was again just sort of regular romantic trip. We would try to make it as romantic as possible. That was the purpose of it. We just tried to like spend time with each other, sort of like learn about each other. But on a certain day, it was just like this conversation, was a unique conversation when we kind of like both started to talk about us not living in Russia. And it was this kind of understanding, like it was not a conversation about like how bad things in Russia. It was just, the thing is that it's not our land, and it's not the place where we should sort of reside or live, that there's something else for us somewhere else. And it was like this understanding that we would never be able to live in Paris as well. Like maybe, I don't know, I still have a dream to like spend maybe a couple of months living there and writing. But in terms of like long term, I would never sort of be able to live there. That's just something that I just also know. And we had this conversation, is that like, yeah, there is nothing bad about France or like Russia, but these are not the places where we would live. And after the trip, we had this like just knowing that we would move away from Russia. And it was this like it was a spiritual guidance, but at that time, this like my perception of spiritual guidance was mostly inner knowing and just understanding, rather than just like hearing the voices say or like seeing the beings of the higher realms. And it was the same sort of for Veronica, and eventually like all these talents unraveled. But at that time, it wasn't like that. But we kind of just, when we returned, we kind of like just knew that we would have to move. And so our plan was kind of like, okay, we can sort of spend maybe 5 years or so living here, like establishing ourselves, like just enjoying ourselves as well, like just to like sort of this romance and understanding each other, but just like sort of earning money to be able to move, right? But that understanding soon enough like turned into like by the summer of next year, it turned into the understanding that we just like need to marry. So when we're gonna move, it would be easier for paperwork. So we would like just be like a spouse and spouses who like just go together, and it would be easier to process the documents and stuff like that. It was quite like a sort of rational decision, but at the same time, it was rooted in love. Like we just we didn't see the point of marriage beyond that, because like we were like just, it was enough for us to sort of like make our vows for ourselves, commit to each other, and just like be sort of loyal to each other in all the ways, right? Like sort of like this commitment of our path. And it was also the commitment to our creative path, because by that time I kind of like recognized that say Veronica was working in office, but she wanted to like do fashion photography and different other like kind of like artistic photography. And so I purchased her a camera, and kind of she started doing that. And then we eventually also purchased different like paints, like oil paints and acrylic paints, and started to sort of create abstract paintings. So it was that kind of like understanding that we kind of like were drawn to each other from the sexual chemistry, from sort of the recognizing each other, from loving each other. But at the same time, our sort of marriage was about this commitment to creative union, that like if we would dedicate both of our resources to one goal, then we will achieve like sort of happiness, or we will achieve whatever we want with our creative endeavors as well. and like together we would be able to sort of elevate our talents and elevate our art as well. Right, and this is like sort of my understanding of marriage. I don't see any other reason to be in this union. But for me, I think that that's the man and woman come together to create something bigger than ourselves, and usually it's like children, like all of that. But sometimes, beyond that, it's also should have something else, like something that like a family builds together. And in my understanding, the best way to do that is to just like dedicate both talents to one sort of single purpose, one single like spiritual path, or like whatever artistic path in our story with Veronica. And so we both kind of recognize the reason for our marriage beyond the love, beyond the feelings, beyond all of that. We never like read anything, like how the marriage should be, or like we never actually deeply discussed it. But we just kind of knew that this is the way, the most empowering way for a man and a woman to grow, is that like you just sort of balance each other, you kind of like hear each other, you mold each other, and you sort of allow each other to unravel in the talents that each of us possesses. And like we didn't know like what those talents were, and like in a full scale, right? Like, but we experimented, we allowed I allowed her the space to search for them, like through paintings, through photography, through different like a digital collages. That's something that she knew she liked, and I unraveled in this like my editing and my filmmaking. And yeah, we kind of soon enough we kind of understood that filmmaking is something that like bonds us deeply, and she became passionate about like helping editing, in terms of like she almost started to perform the role of the producer. Like she didn't do the technical editing, but she was there all the time to sort of talk to me about it, to discuss it, to kind of like guide it, to challenge me, of course. And through that, again, through challenging me, through understanding, kind of like having this deeper intuitive knowing how a woman should be, she started to slowly mold me into the best version who I would be. Like I would try to, if she would like sort of recognize my self-destructive patterns, or like something like the habits that are not empowering, she would bring my attention to them, not in the way that like she would scream at me, how like women often are, but that she would like constructively explain to me why it would be beneficial for both of us, right? Like, and then I would just like sort of, oh, okay, yeah, it makes sense. I would switch to that, right? And so, but I also, in terms of my help to her, is that I allowed her to unravel and to speak her truth as well, because like this is something, again, that women in relationship often don't do, is that like they don't speak their truth, and then their man don't present them the space to cry the tears, or they don't present them the space to find their passions, So it was that kind of like slowly we started to sort of see how that kind of like living quickly helps us to grow and heal from our past. But then it's just like sort of you become like one force, right? Like you sort of merge, even though we still had like different day jobs, right? Like, and we sort of spent only like evenings or time in between our jobs. And especially I had sort of like a sometimes my job required me to stay overnight in Moscow or Nizhny Novgorod, so I wasn't always like at home. But like the times that we were together, we were like committing everything to our shared goals, and it was always kind of like changing, but the main goal was always that like if we would commit ourselves to this creative union, then it will lead us to the happiness that we want and to life that we want to live. And that's sort of like, this is the highest aspiration of the idea of pursuit of happiness, right? Like this is that the happiness is not actually achievable, and it's not something that you sort of can explain, and happiness can be different for different people. Somebody's happy to be alone, and there's nothing wrong with that. but sort of the pursuit of happiness is the path, and the empowerment and joy and pleasure comes from that. Like, you're not pretending, you're not playing a role in the relationship, you're not trying to like gain something from each other, you're not there for like this any kind of like superficial reasons, but you're there to elevate your soul, to elevate your essence, to become the best version of yourself that you can be. And this is how we see each other, and this is kind of like how we see each other to this day, even though like we're not together anymore, but we continue to be that kind of a friend to each other. So like we kind of like highlighting the blind spots, helping each other to elevate, helping each other to grow. If we see that somebody's like sort of need to heal certain area, we would bring that to attention. And it was always kind of comes with empowering way, right? Like, and it's not saying that we don't fight, and we still fight to this day. But through even in these fights, when you kind of like sort of step away and then you recognize your blind spots, they always sort of elevate you, you know, like, and you just don't live in that pettiness, you don't live in this like a resentment or like this bitter about what somebody did or say. You just kind of like grow through it, and you use it as sort of it's sort of like moments of empowerment, right? And so this is how we continue to live. And by the middle of the 2011, we kind of like just had this knowing that we need to marry as soon as possible, and we started to prepare ourselves to get married. And we sort of planned it we wanted to plan it for a day of Russia of 2012, so it would be like June 12th, 2012. And for Veronica's mother, it was important to get married in the like a main register office, like a main sort of building where they do marriages in Saint Petersburg. It's like in a downtown Saint Petersburg, so like the queue to get there is quite long enough. So at that time we sort of came there and booked our date, but of course they don't work on June 12th, and so like our trolling of Russia never materialized, but we just got married on June 13th instead, which is like more empowering because the 13th is the date that resonates with feminine energies, and that was important sort of to get those kinds of energies for us. So we planned our marriage, and we started to plan our honeymoon as well, and we sort of decided that we will like sort of save up and go to France again, and that we would like, because by that time we recognized that we are sort of our favorite wine was of Côte d'Iron region of Russia, of France. It would be amazing if it was in Russia, right? So the Côte d'Iron region of the River Rhone and the south of Rhone Valley. That's particular something that we liked, both of us, and so we decided to just go there as well, like just like visit Nice and Cannes, just to see that sort of like how the cities are, how these towns are, and then just drive to the South Rhone Valley and then end our trip in Paris. And so by the June of 2012, it was we kind of planned that we would again move, but we didn't have any sort of like a solid plans, you know, like the marriage was this like first step that like we sort of recognizing the guidance, understanding it, and sort of showing the nature that we are committing to this path. We're committing to our union, but we're also committing to our idea of going to live somewhere else. And it was this like a plan all along, but we didn't have any sort of idea where we'd go, and we still at that time believed that it like will take us a few years to move out. And then of course May of 2012 happened, and that's kind of, I don't know, just entire winter, entire like whenever, I don't exactly remember when the elections were, but that was the winter and the spring of 2012. For everyone in Russia, it was clear where the country is going. So Putin spent 2 terms as a president, then he stepped down, and he sort of became like prime minister. And sort of everybody believed that he won't return. But of course, because of the way that Europeans perceived him and how he was treated by Europeans, how he was treated by the elites of the world, how he was constantly put down, it was this like idea of that I'll just break any rules just because you don't have any rules as well. And that's like the continuous conversation that Putin has with the European countries to this day, that started in 2007 with his very famous Munich speech. This conversation continues to happen, and most of the decisions that he does is the part of that conversation, right? Like of an ongoing conversation that sort of continues to be the main sort of issue for him and for anybody who has sort of dignity and self-respect and self-value. And it eventually became my conversation with Canadians and with Europeans, is that like, yeah, we may be coming from Russia, but it doesn't mean that we don't have humanity and we are not human beings, and we're like can be treated with that kind of like a level of arrogance and hubris, is that like nobody's better than anybody else, but Europeans and Canadians together, they live in this like a way of idea of moral superiority above all other nations, and of course like nobody likes to be disrespected and treated like that, and so this was partially one of the reasons why Putin decided to stay in power in 2012. Of course, it was also kind of quite clear at that time that the entire process, the entire journey of that, like say winter of 2011 to the spring of 2012, was this conflict between Russian elites, basically, right? Like this was also another element to that, and the majority of the elites like supported the vision of Putin for Russia, and they just like wanted to stay in power for obvious reasons, for material reasons, for resources, because like everybody is controlled the situation. And so this was the debate, right? Like through these like protests that keep occurring over this period of time, this was the debate between sort of different factions of Russian elites that eventually materialized of like very solid support for Putin and his vision and his sort of idea for Russia. But at the same time, what was the most interesting part, like for me as a person, right? Because at that time, I didn't understand all the reasons, like I didn't know this internal conflict that he had with Europeans. And I didn't understand fully his perspectives, because like I thought that he was just like sort of talking nonsense when he was like talking how he's being continuously disrespected by United States and by Europeans, how it was kind of like everybody sort of thought, who sort of read different articles and who were exposed to Western media, who knew the language, everybody kind of believed that he's sort of like a crazy, he's just like sort of fear-mongering and saying that we are being unfairly treated by United States and by Europeans. But like, for example, I didn't see the real truth in that, because like, for example, I could see that people went to America and they studied and they brought knowledge, and they would like create the businesses based on the knowledge that they gained in the United States, and the same was with Europe. So I was like kind of in this idea of, yes, of course, they maybe see Russia as something confrontational, but not to the extent that Putin kept claiming. And the claim was always that like always we will always be treated unfairly by them because they perceive us as inferior. And that claim like never resonated with me or with anybody who sort of like again read the American like newspapers, American articles or European articles or newspapers, or like watch the TV, or like just being sort of traveling, exposing. Nobody sort of could see where that was coming from actually, and so it was always seen as by the liberal media in Russia and by whoever, like by the opposition media, let's say it like that. By the opposition media in Russia, it was always perceived as sort of just again fear mongering and just creating, just telling people something to like stay in power, right? Like that was always how it was framed. And again, there was truth to that because it was evident all along, but at the same time, by now you can see that the claim was actually had some substance, right? Like so that like Russia is being specifically targeted and treated unfairly just based on this idea that Europe, America, and Canada are morally superior to Russia. And just like people in these countries are morally superior, they're better just by the virtue of their birth, And again, you can say anything about Putin, but nobody wants to be treated like that. And that like the journey of Donald Trump as well showed that, right? Like that. That this like a perception that some people are better than others only because they have some sort of like a moral virtues or moral understanding of the world that others don't. I don't think it's like a valuable argument to make. So, but again, in this time, at that time, like, it was that kind of clear fight, for everybody in Russia who sort of were exposed to outside world, is that, this is just a grab of power. That Putin is bending the rules, that he's rewriting the constitution, that he's sort of like this just being evil being who wants to take control of Russia and like just sort of drain the resources. And again, there was a truth to that, but at the same time, it was much more deeper for him. And but that at that time, like everybody dismissed all his other arguments, right? Like, and to this day, if you would like sort of talk to opposition, whoever perceive themselves as being in opposition to Putin, they will continue to claim that there is no substance to that argument. But by now, we all can see that there is plenty of substance to that argument, because it didn't only happen to Putin, it keeps happening to other people, like including to Americans, right? Like including that, like to Donald Trump. And you can say anything about anybody, to their personalities, to their goals, to their achievements, but the entire idea that you can just disrespect a person because you perceive them as morally inferior and you don't allow them to have their own arguments or their perception of the world is completely ridiculous, and it doesn't have any substance, and it only leads to conflicts, because everybody's born on this plane to be equal, and nobody's better than others just because they have more money or they have some sort of like a set of values that are kind of perceived to be better than others, which is like, again, not a claim, because the morals coming from inside of a person, and it's never something that can be translated from one person to another, exactly because each of us has a different and unique soul with a specific archetype and essence, and so our morals are derived from that, and they are also derived from the lineage of the soul. And so, of course, it's impossible to sort of like have this unified robotic society where everybody is the same, because again, we have different essences of the souls, and we have different archetypes of our destiny. So therefore our morals will be different. And when all of that started to happen, and when it was clear that Putin would stay in power and became a president again, of course, I was like, both me and Veronica were kind of like, we have to go, because it's just it was clear, like, this sort of idea of usurpation of power. It was clear the idea of control, that like they would start to destroy the media, they would start to close down all the freedoms that they are there, and it was this kind of like a sign for us that maybe this is the time for us to go. And what was the most terrifying about that period was that, like, I was working on the train, and so I was exposed to many people, many different people like traveled on these trains, and I kept like sort of having these conversations with them, and of course with my friends. And what was the most unique is that even if a person, so I was like 2012, I was 29 years old at that time. And so whoever was like sort of this younger generation, they could recognize the malevolence of what was happening, and that this was just a power grab control, right? Like this the usurpation of power. But I was like completely surprised that even the people from my generation, like my friends, they just like were fully on board with return of Putin to power. And I remember this like one conversation that I had at that time with one of my very close friends who lived in Moscow, and I kind of asked him, "What do you think?" And he said all the same things, is that like, yeah, I kind of understand what's happening truly, but then he said, I would still vote for Putin because we know where we are getting our money, which meant where we are stealing our money, right? Like, because most of the money in Russia are stolen money. You can't just like earn the money. You can only steal them, or sort of like a scam or like fraud, like all these kind of things. It's like impossible to just like to survive with going to a regular job. And so in one form or the other, all the money in Russia are being stolen. And so like this was his argument, is that I know where to steal the money right now. And if Putin would be replaced with somebody else, I don't know if I would be able to steal money from the same places, and the rules of the games may change. So I don't want to change the rules of the game, because like that was the very, very solid argument if you live in Russia, because people were so tired that the rules kept changing, right? Like how I told about the story of my father, is that like he basically lived his entire life with constantly changing rules of engagement, and you would rather have corrupt rules than don't have rules at all, because you can at least know how to navigate the reality. And you kind of like, I would prefer any sort of usurpation of power, or any sort of like a form of stability, because at least I know how to navigate that reality. It's not even like about the stealing per se, right? Like, but just like sort of, what to do to be able to survive, right? Like what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do. But if rules keep changing, it's very hard to sort of live an empowering life. And so with that kind of argument, I received a completely different perception on the situation. I was shocked to hear it, actually, like, because it was one of my closest friends, and when he sort of like joked about it, like, we know where to steal our money. I was kind of like, I understand that perception, but it's so fucked up. Like the entire reality was so fucked up for me, because my entire argument as well on my job was that like I'm tired of stealing, I'm tired of lying, but it was the only way to be able to make a living. And that like a train job was like the real sort of how would you say, like slice of Russia, like you would see all types of people, and you kind of like understood Russia. And I was always had this argument, is that I want to live somewhere where I don't need to lie to myself to be able to survive, and that I want to live as a free person, but to be free, you have to be yourself. But in order to be yourself, you have to live in a place where you don't have to lie. At least not all the time. But that was just the reality of Russia, and that's the idea of tyranny, and the idea of Soviet Union is that how what the communism actually is, or what totalitarianism actually is a great definition, is that it's a place or society where most people lie most of the time, because if you live like that, the communism and totalitarianism would just emerge on itself. People don't need to sort of install certain system or go or lead life to a certain ideology. It would just, the life in itself would start to respond to that kind of a behavior of people, and it would create the system of totalitarianism and enslavement. And it doesn't really matter what kind of system it is, right? So and you can clearly see this is sort of the emergence of totalitarian state in United States of America during the Biden years, for example. It was that most of Americans decided to lie most of the time, so it was reflected in this form of totalitarian government. That started to go against their political opponents, which is something that never occurred in the 250 years of American history, right? So it was that idea is that people decided that they want to live in a totalitarian state by making everyday choices. And so for me, that was the image of the freedom, is that I want to be free in that, is that if I don't lie to myself, and I kept sort of living in this world where I have to balance between my employers, clients, and my colleagues, because I was sort of, again, manager of the team. I had 10 people under me. I had to balance between all of them to sort of steal enough so they would have enough money to continue working, but not steal so much that you would get caught by your employer. And it was everybody lived like that, right? So every single team on the trains were living like that. It was just the sort of the rules of the engagement created by our employer. And they sort of created that system because they didn't want to pay more taxes. But at the same time, they also tried to keep it in check so it wouldn't be sort of a huge loss to their revenue, right? So, and just this entire system of living, it was just insane. And I'm seeing my friends, I'm seeing all people around me, I'm seeing Veronica and her family, that everybody's sort of lying in their everyday life all the time. And then on top of that, by the time that we sort of got married and went to that romantic trip to France, we just kind of saw how it would say the energies of hatred, the energies of intolerance, the energies of sort of inner suppression are rising amongst everybody who we interacted with, and just in society. We were seeing that the society was going into the direction of more and more hatred and sort of a demand for violence, let's say it like that. And it was this kind of a very intuitive feeling, just almost an air being suppressed, right? The period of life, the period of time between 2000 and 2008 there was a lot of freedom, a feeling of freedom in Russia. There was a lot of hope and a lot of that kind of sense, and everybody almost could do anything that they wanted. That was at least kind of a feeling, a perception. And by 2012 it was all gone, and it was completely changed. That people expected darkness, they demanded darkness, if it makes sense. that they were bitter and resentful and they spiteful and like just like again lying to each other all the time and lying to themselves all the time. And it was this like a logical understanding that yeah, we need to go because Putin would take control of the power and he would like eventually close all the media that he doesn't like, kill his political opponents that he doesn't like. That was just like a clear as day for us. And we kind of like, oh, it's gonna get dark, right? Like, and so we went to France again. And once we got to Paris, we sort of, by that time, again, we still didn't fully understood our capacities or abilities, but it was that communion with the spirits of Sen, because once we returned from Paris, it was just clear that we need to move as soon as possible, that we don't have these 5 years that we can wait, that like we got married and we expedited our marriage just for that purpose, is that like we can move faster out of here. And sort of by the fall, we actually received like direct guidance. Sort of we both started to hear voices of angels. We kind of like didn't have the language at that time. We just like sort of heard the skies, let's say it like that, but it was angels and our spiritual guides directing us. And we both had that understanding that like we need to move as soon as possible. And at that time, my father's soul started to return and appear, and he was kind of encouraging me to move as well, right? And so I started to logically think what I could do potentially and how can we move. And of course, the easiest way to move was to sort of apply for some kind of education and then eventually maybe receive the permanent status in the place that we would go. And we started to think about all like many different things, and the most thing that like the main countries that were talked about was Latin America, like Chile and Argentina, Brazil, Peru, like all these countries. That was one of our sort of ideas. We of course looked at Australia and New Zealand, but it was just way too expensive for us. And then one was like somehow we continued sort of research, and it was clear that in terms of documents, the most straightforward path to citizenship was in Canada. And the main idea was is that like while if I would receive the ability to like the visa to study in the university, Veronica was eligible to receive a working visa. So at least we would both be there in the same place and somebody of us could work at least. And so this sounded like a good plan, like logically, but we continued sort of like look at different countries. We even looked at Ukraine as well. And we thought that kind of like we could potentially find our purposes in Kiev, because the Kiev at that time, it was one of the main capitals where a lot of Russian music videos and commercials and even TV shows and films were shot. So we browsed through our options and to kind of have different understanding of what it would take for us to move, and there was no easy way anyway, because it was, again, the money was also a very, very significant component to that, just to be able to afford that. And we kind of just didn't know what would be the easiest path, and we continued to navigate that reality. And then my father kept like sort of reminding me about Vancouver. And the story with Vancouver was very interesting in my family, because like I kept hearing that the name of this town from when I was, 12. And it was heard in our household throughout my childhood, because my father's grandfather, my great grandfather, he actually moved to Vancouver in I think it was in the 40s after the war, but from the Western Ukraine. And he moved to Vancouver, and he lived here till the beginning of 70s. And he could never like bring his family, but he would always send my father like vinyl records and jeans and stuff like that, and kept communication with him through letters. And so, but in my childhood, I only remember there was one picture, like there was like a sort of a letter with an envelope, and there was a picture of my great-grandfather with a woman that he married here. And they were like dressed nicely and all of that. He basically was able to build good life here. But my father was always kind of, we should go to Vancouver to at least see his grave. And actually, my father, throughout the 90s, he was actively considering moving out from Russia, because like he was quite clear, understood what was happening around. But my mom lived in this like illusion and this fairy tale like world that she kept pretending that she doesn't see any violence. She kept pretending that Russia is not a criminal state. She kept pretending that my father doesn't need to like bankrupt his companies to just make a living. She kept like living in this world that she has created to herself, and that like everything is great about Russia, and Russia is this like a wonderful country with no problems whatsoever, very much like Canadians perceive their country, and so that she continues to live like that to this day, in this very like a delusional perception of her surroundings, and that's why like I never received any sort of direct, like good guidance to how to navigate that reality, because she continues to deny it. And so she never supported that dream of my father, but he kept telling to me, and especially when he got drunk, he kept like bringing this up. Like he kept saying, we should move to Vancouver. And then when he kind of like realized that we wouldn't be able to move to Vancouver, he was like, well, at least we have to visit Vancouver and to sort of visit the grave of his grandfather. And so Vancouver was always like sort of the world that I knew. And then when I started to like research filmmaking and start to write about filmmaking, it became quite evident quite soon that Vancouver is actually a place where a lot of American movies are shot, which like surprised me at that time. But then I was kind of like, this is the interesting place to be for filmmaking. And so in the fall of 2012, my father returned with that reminder, and I didn't actually sort of make much of it, and I still didn't like share with Veronica that my father talked to me, because I still like didn't fully trust it. It was that sort of knowing and guidance and all of these things. They were quite confusing when you again, we don't have the words, and they're not very clear things, and you kind of always ask yourself whether it's just how you perceive it, or you just imagining things, or that you're making things up, or just like a thought. Maybe it's just a thought in your mind and you perceive it as a guidance. But no, it was that kind of like a reminder that this is where I'm guiding you towards. And so but parallel to that, I started to research places where I could apply. And because sort of I graduated from the University of Cinema in Saint Petersburg with a bachelor degree in public relationship and film, and then I went to continue my education to get master's in film studies, but I never finished. Like I spent 3 years studying that, but I never got the degree, because the professor who ran this program, he had a lot of pride in not graduating students. So this is something that he told me on our first meeting, when I was accepted into the program. I decided to sort of present my thesis and talk to my professor about it, like who would sort of be in charge of my thesis. And during that first meeting, he basically told me that he runs this program for 10 years, and in 10 years, he never graduated a single student, and he intends to continue doing that, not to graduate anybody, because how he said that because there is no bachelor's program in film studies, he doesn't consider that anybody who would be able to get the master's in film studies, which kind of like has its own logic, but it's like a very fucked up logic. Why would you like take the students even if this is your logic, and if you like not gonna give them graduation documents and stuff like that, right? And so I was seeing that as just this like a just crazy thing that didn't make any sort of sense. And of course I was this like a passionate young man, right? And I was like sort of convinced that if he would see how great my thesis would turn out to be, how like powerful it is, and how I will do a good job in writing it, that he would change his mind. Like this was sort of very, very naive way of perceiving that world. And sort of I struggled for 3 years trying to sort of like have all these exams pass, and I did pass all the requirements and all the courses, but again, of course, I was not graduated from that program as promised. And so I thought that, okay, I can at least apply to some other school somewhere in the world as a master in film studies and sort of continue that. But by that time, I didn't really wanted to write about movies. I wanted to make them. That was sort of my understanding, my perception after my endeavors. I wanted to research the philosophy on film and sort of like make film studies through making films. That's how I sort of believed my journey would unravel. And so I started to research programs around the world that would have that kind of thing, as that master's degree in film studies, because I never seen, like, say, master's degree in film production. And then all of a sudden I'm finding this program, and it was just literally the only program that I found was the Masters of Film Production, and it was in Vancouver and University of British Columbia. And I thought it's like a quite odd coincidence, but I'm kind of like, no, this is just a sign, right? And so I submitted my movies that I finished by that time. It was like 3 movies, two like these 2 1-hour-long movies, and one was still in a raw shape. It was also 1 hour, but it eventually turned out to be like a 30-minute movie. And I presented all of that, and I also you had to also present the idea for your thesis that you would sort of attempt to do in your master's program. And my idea for thesis was of that is that like I would shoot the movie exactly how I shot all my other movies, just in English, and in the space of university, which sort of like will have more resources to help me elevate that kind of a filmmaking. And sort of I wrote this treatment, how I would approach the filmmaking in this form is that like in an improvisational form is that I would like write the scripts, but I would not write dialogues, and I would allow actors to get from point A to point B, and then it was just like be all experimental and avant-garde and shot like sort of handheld or in this way of American independent filmmaking, of like Sundance vibe, stuff like that, right? Like so this was my treatment, this was my pitch to the team. And I spent a lot of time, like I basically spent the entire like couple of last months of 2012 preparing that like my pitch to the University of British Columbia to accept me. And I never applied to any other universities at all. Like I just kind of knew that it was a sign. I just had that knowing that this is our path, that we just with Veronica we never even like worried about it or never thought about it. We just kind of, okay, if it's not going to work out, we still have time. There is no rush for us to sort of move. This would be our first sort of attempt to do that. And yeah, then a couple of months later, a person from University of British Columbia reached out, and she's like, we want to schedule the video interview to talk to you about your sort of proposal and consider you to enroll in our program. So I replied to that video call request, and we scheduled our appointment. And so I had this conversation with two women, Sharon McGowan and Rachel Talalay, and as eventually we found out, they both had connection to Russia. Sharon had her ancestors coming from Russia and living in British Columbia, and Rachel had her grandfather running away from Saint Petersburg to Germany in 20s, and then from Germany to US because he was Jewish descent, and he basically was persecuted first in Russia, and then he was persecuted in Germany. And so it was that kind of again, the coincidence, right? And so how I always say the coincidences are not real. It's not there is no such a thing as a coincidence. It's the language of nature, or language of God, or language of angels, whatever words you want to use. But this is sort of what illuminates our path, right? And so on this call, we had a very friendly conversation. I explained to them my perceptions on the filmmaking, on how I'm seeing my thesis turning out to be, how I want to approach this program, that I want to have the resources to be able to experiment with filmmaking, that I'm not doing this program as to become, like a strict solid Hollywood filmmaker who would follow certain rules and paths. I'm not that kind of a person. And they recognize that as a special talent, as a unique pitch of my proposal, that allows me to stand out among other people. And so they accepted me into that program. And they usually, how they later said to me, that they usually take around 2-3 people per year into that program. But that year they only accepted one person. It was me, which again was another sort of coincidence, right? To that illuminated my path to Vancouver, and kind of just showed that this is the place of my destiny. And so we applied. It was already spring of 2013, and we applied for a visa to Canada because I'm supposed to start my year in September, and which was very, very short schedule to be able to be approved for a visa and to be able to actually pack and move. And especially, we've never been to Canada, we've never been to Vancouver. It was that kind of adjustment. We still needed to sort of understand what we will do for money, whether we need to sell this apartment that I was living in. Because the apartment that I was living in was that it was from the inheritance of my father. My sister got her own place. I got my own place. It was just a small bachelor studio apartments, but it was still something for each our own. And my mom lived outside of Moscow with her sort of boyfriend, right? Or her man, whatever you want to call their relationship. So we debated that we probably should just sell this place, because both of us had just this knowing that we're not going to return. But something logical in us, of course, we kind of, we're just going to travel back and forth. We're going to be sort of visiting Russia. We're not cutting all the ties. We don't know how it's going to play out. If it's just going to be about education, we will return. We never sort of we knew that our lives would be outside of Russia, and that there is some special purpose for us, and there is a land that wants us, but we still didn't know that it would be in Vancouver, right? So we kind of had all our options on the table. We never sort of wanted to completely cut ties with Russia. And so when I told to my mother that I was accepted, of course she started to send all the destructive energies towards me. By that time she was she was very resentful of Veronica. Like she saw her only once at the wedding, and then she didn't make any sort of attempt to communicate with her, to get to know her as a person, to kind of understand my perceptions, to understand that we have this soul bond. She just saw her as a threat, like how all narcissistic and abusive mothers perceive women in the lives of their sons, is that they would take away the energies that I use for my empowerment. Like all mothers exploit, like all narcissistic mothers, they exploit their sons. They sort of attach spiritual cords to them, and then they drain the energy. So like basically a man serves the womb of the mother instead of serving a womb of his woman. This is just a common thing. It's common. I see it everywhere in Vancouver as well, and among Canadians. I see it like all over the place. It's just the something that mothers do. Like the mothers who lost their souls, of course, the mothers who like corrupt, right? Like, so not empowering mothers who actually want their sons to sort of get happy. And so she started just like this relentless attack of like trying to convince me not to move. And I told her like a year before that I would eventually move, but then it became this like a pressure campaign, and this like she started to do everything that she could physically to prevent us from moving. So she started to sort of like play this role of like, where would she say, oh yeah, I support you with everything, but then she would like do concrete steps and do energy, like sort of like, like hatred, like sending hatred, which like became creating the actual obstacles on our path of getting visa and everything like that. And we also like living in a huge self-doubt as well, is that like we're kind of like, oh, we're not good enough and we're not going to sort of like receive this visa, right? Like, or that we would like be locked in Russia and maybe this is not our path. All this like basically going back and forth. And on top of that, we never like finished our work that we knew that we need to finish in Russia. And it was a spiritual work. So by that time I started to do like energy healing on Veronica, like sort of cleansing her aura and like patching the scars and different like holes in her energy body, working with chakras, and sort of like I was like intuitively like doing that work. And we started to do these kind of like a ceremonies of cleansing the demons, let's say it like that, right? Like, so I sort of channeling everything, and the main ceremony for that, it was only in the future, as it turned out. Because again, we only started to experiment with that, but it was never sort of fully solidly understood. And also we never experimented enough with like paintings and stuff like that. And so in June of 2013, we received the rejection from Canadian Embassy. And at that time they were on strike, and we later turned out that they rejected basically all of the, like even for sportsmen, they rejected all the visas. But their argument was that like we are not employable in Russia, so therefore we would like become a burden and like sort of stay in Canada and not return, which again was like a strange argument, because say when Indians go to Canada, they are being specifically told that you would be able to stay in Canada, and that's why they go, right? So like, but for Russians it was different. And again, the entire sort of immigration system of Canada is built upon that you sort of come, and if you sort of show that you're being able to integrate, we will provide you pathways to stay, because we need people, right? Like our population is aging. We advertising Canada as this place of opportunities, because we know our challenges and problems, and we need younger generation who would be able to sort of create children, bring children into the world, like, right, like sort of, and be young couple who like builds future of Canada, right? Like this was the entire pitch of Canadian immigration system as well. But yeah, by that time I could understand that how Russia was, and how it became more and more totalitarian and oppressive, that the rules for Russians were different than for everybody else. And so we kind of, when we received that rejection, of course, the first thing was like we panicked, because we kind of like, we don't know what else to do. And this program is great, and like it's just a great opportunity, and like it would suck to just like say no to it and reject it. And so we reached out to university, and university kind of like said, if you can apply to, like, if you sort of apply again, we can sort of accept you not in a fall semester, but you can come in a winter semester. So start your education on January 1st of 2014. So we saw it as a sign of hope, right? And so we kind of like both decided that like we would invest in documents, that we would sort of present our case, that we have a money, that we were able to get employer, because by that time we both thought that we're going, and so we both stepped away from our jobs, both Veronica and me. So we had to like find new employment, basically. And so which we did. And we kind of like presented new case, presented more money in our bank account, and sent another application for visa. Quite soon we also realized that this sort of form of engagement, the way that things are playing out, is actually has a spiritual component to it. Is that like we soon realized that if we didn't receive the visa, it means that we didn't finish some spiritual work. And if we would finish that spiritual work, visa would just come through, right? Like that was just, at that time, that was just knowing that this is how things are in the world. And at the same time, like karmically, or I don't know, like energetically, you can also see that this is sort of the idea is that that the nature asks you, do you really want that, right? And so eventually, throughout all of our time dealing with Canadian government, it was always like that. It was always kind of, we would get everything from the second attempt, not from the first one. This is kind of, again, the spiritual way of things is that like, oh, do you really want to go to Canada, right? Like, do you really need it, or are you just sort of applying because you have an opportunity? Which I don't know if it's that just like a solid strategy for them, or it's just sort of nature playing out through them in this way. But this is how we read that rejection. And so we started to like do all sort of things, but mainly we started to be more dedicated to our craft of creativity, you know, like all the crafts, writing, painting, editing, creating movies, like thinking about all of that. And we started to shoot a movie at that time about the reasons why we decided to move. So we decided to sort of record everything that was happening, like just capture that period of life, but also just state clear to sort of to the nature, to the world, to everybody, to collective consciousness, the reasons why we perceive that our fate is not in Russia and this is not our country to live. And that movie was eventually, we completed it in 2019, and it's called When is the War? And in that movie, we captured the first channelings that Veronica started to have, and these like oracle, clear female oracle channelings. When a woman just knows things and she just feels them and she reads them from collective subconsciousness. So, right, like so we started to remove all the blocks that she had from the past, right? And sort of we did this big ceremony where we sort of, I cleansed her energy body and we channeled her demons of the past who kept destroying her into this like a plush toy, and then we burned that toy, and she sort of like specifically said in the video, I'm burning away humans' intolerance, hatred, and malevolence. The evil of people was sort of like that monster that kept chasing her, right? The society, the pressures of society. And for us, it was that energetical sort of cut with the past, right? Like just removing that, and at the same time, just finishing our spiritual work and understanding how we are actually, what we're capable of. And so once we sort of recorded that movie and did everything that we could, we received our visa in November of 2013. And so as we received it, we realized that like we have less than 2 months to get ready to be able to move. We had to move, and the cheapest tickets to Vancouver were on December 22nd. Or 21st, December 21st. And so we just purchased the tickets right away and started to prepare to move. And so that in that time it was this like entire debate whether we should sell the apartment and use that money to be able to establish our life in Vancouver, because by that time we clearly knew that we have to move and we're probably not going to return. So on that channeling session that Veronica had in the movie, she's saying zombies will start to attack, and that the war is coming. And so slowly after that I started to receive the same guidance that like the war is imminent, that the war will start very soon in Russia. And we couldn't understand what that war was. We kind of like we were dealing with so much, we couldn't sort of like see where it actually sort of would unravel. But we could understand that the war is imminent from the energies of people. So basically the collective subconscious of Russia wanted war. The majority of people who we interacted with wanted war. And so we kind of like, just gonna sort of emerge because majority of people want war, right? And that's kind of like a also very interesting concept. Like it's very if you read about the Germany in 1930s, it was the same thing. Just people want war, and that's just like, because again most of the people live in hopelessness, they are lost, they don't know what they're doing, they live in a fear of death, they don't understand the rules of life, they are afraid of everything, they live in perpetual fear, they live in constant conflicts with each other because they misuse their sexual energies, they not living as themselves, they lie to themselves all the time, and then of course they are terrified of death. And so if you have war, there is always a purpose. You are right and they're wrong. Our side is like for the good and their side for the evil. So therefore, like there is a reason, a purpose to live. Rather than searching for one's purpose, rather than understanding what your soul wants, why you are here, what would be the most empowering life for you. It's all complicated questions for the adults, right? Like so, and if you sort of are living in the childlike state, you would prefer to have war because the war makes everything very clear. And this is like, for example, why right now you can clearly see that the entire world is moving to that direction, why European countries want war, like why the majority of Europeans, let's say like that, why the majority of Canadians want war is for the same reason, is that there is like a hopelessness and the fear of death, and that like combination and misuse of sexual energies, which like in combination create that desire of like being in a state of war, because you know why you're waking up each day and why you continue in this life. Is that like there's something greater to live for? You living for the purpose that you would win. You will live for the purpose of like, when the war will end, we'll have good lives and stuff like that, right? Like, so this is the direction that we clearly see that's happening around the world, because people have all the kind of like a spiritual ailments and all the disconnect with the souls and disconnect with their purpose, with the divinity, with Mother Nature. And so if you are, and as well, this is the manifestation of life itself, is that if people lie to themselves, if they don't live in their purpose, if they hate or despise nature, if they continuously try to begin conflicts with their relatives, with their close ones, with their beloved, with their children, then nature will reflect war to them as the punishment, as a sort of retribution for their sins, and the sin of being like not following the path of your soul and not living in your truth and just constantly lying, right? Like the tyranny just emerges. And this is how it was always in the human history for any kind of a society, whether it's being just a small tribe or a big country. It was always the same thing, is that like if say a small tribe, if they continuously live not in accordance with the laws of nature, the nature would start to sort of unravel with manifestations of life that would create conditions for people to return back to living in their purpose, to sort of reset their souls, right? Like so, the natural disasters is the manifestation of that. Different viruses is the manifestation of that, and then eventually, if people don't understand, then the war arrives, because the war is that this like ultimate equalizer and the ultimate sort of punishment from nature, the ultimate sort of reset of souls, right? Because when there is a war, the rules of engagement are completely different, and you can sort of, if you interact right now, if you talk to Russians, for example, everybody would tell you that people living more united lives. They kind of like they care more for their neighbors. They sort of engage in the communities more. They sort of have this hope for life. The same happening in Ukraine, if you would see, right? Like because the war sort of brings people to that, to kind of to appreciate life more, which is like in my perception. Kind of looking maybe a little bit from above, but like just knowing my authority, is that I would think it's very sort of, again, maybe childish, I don't want to sort of put labels on anybody or say that they're kind of like flawed in this way, but like very kind of very childish way of interacting with life. I would like people to just find their purpose and find their truth without and just be nice to each other and live with kindness without the war coming to make them live like that. And I would rather prefer people live in tune with their souls, connected with their souls without the war. I don't want to wait for the war to bring their souls back. And so this understanding, that was the most profound understanding that we had when we still didn't receive the visa, but Veronica had these channelings about the upcoming war. She said specifically, we need to run as soon as possible. We need to run right now. We don't have other options. That's how she worded it at that time. And we kind of saw this design because again, we believed that we had these 5 years or so to be able to make our plans, but everything, the way that it unraveled, the way that we were being called to get married, the way that I was accepted in this UBC program was of that, is that everything around us was helping us to get out of Russia as soon as possible. But of course, once we sort of received the visa and paid for the tickets, my mom started to had this a new way of hatred directed at us, and she kept trying to convince me to stay, which again was just insane concept. And she started to do things, again, intentionally doing things to prevent us from leaving, which eventually resulted that we had to pack on the last day, and we almost missed our cab to the plane. Because of how clingy and how destructive she was, and how much sort of hatred and negative energies she brought into our space, which is actually the form of black magic, right? Like if you sort of send the hatred and energy towards someone, it would start to create the impediments on their path, because sort of the energy is so powerful, and especially the energy of the mother towards their children. If the mother wants their children to be losers, to be nobody, to always fail, to have failed relationships, that would just manifest because the motherly energies are so powerful. And so like she wanted basically to continue exploit my energies, and that was her beef with Veronica initially, and that was her beef with me moving out, because if I would be moving out, I would be further away from her, so she won't be able to punish me, to put me down, to diminish me, to destroy me, to like sort of to kind of make me as a lesser man, that I would like never realize my full potential, right? Like that was her idea. And you also have to understand from the spiritual perception is that such mothers who have lost souls, who are like and again, if a person doesn't understand how to recognize a lost soul, you can try to understand the traits of the narcissistic abuser, and usually that would be a confirmation that you're dealing with somebody who has lost soul. These people usually, so the traits that you can sort of recognize in a person to understand that is that they're always self-centered, everything is only about them, they never acknowledge their mistakes, they don't think about their past, they think that they're always right, they would blank out in the moments where they did something wrong to a person. They would just erase that from the memory, and they actually don't have that memory. And when you kind of like start to bring that up, that this is what you did, like the hurtful thing, a narcissistic abuser will always say, I never did that, because not because they tried to gaslight you, but because they actually don't have the memory of that. They would destroy the memory of the things that they did bad to others, and they will only remember what good they did. So like in their train of thought, it would be always they're sort of they're right and everybody's wrong, and there are good people. And so there are also like different other elements, but we'll continue to talk, because like this is our story. My story is that like I'm dealing with a lot of people with lost souls, and it's important to start bring that awareness to the world, and it's important for all of us to start to recognize people with lost souls, so we would be able to like either help them or avoid interacting with them, because it's literally pointless to interact with a person and try to sort of hope that they would get better if they have lost soul. There is a way from shamanic perspective how to return a lost soul, but in most cases, like most people won't be able to do that, and it's just easier not to interact with that kind of person. And so my mom, just started to like what she always does, start to sort of like diminish me, tell me that I'm gonna fail there, that I will like run coming back, that nothing will gonna like manifest from that I would never be able to stay in Canada, that I would need to return back to Russia, that I'm not allowed to sell this apartment because of that, because I would be eventually return. We barely were able to like do everything that we needed to finish, but we finished the shooting of the movie by November, before we received the visa, and then we just like started to pack and prepare ourselves to move. And in December of 2013 we traveled to Toronto and then to Vancouver, and we arrived in Vancouver on December 23rd of 2013. We lived for a week in a hotel, and then we rented our place, this place that I'm living right now, and started to live here since January 1st of January of 2014. I went to UBC to start my program, and I received a teaching assistant position, which kind of I actually didn't receive it right away. I received it only next semester, but it was able to sort of sustain us. But at that time, I received like financial support from university, which Rachel, Rachel Talley, who was supposed to be my teaching advisor in the program, was able to sort of help me with. And she was also nice enough to invite me and Veronica to a Christmas dinner with her family, which was extremely welcoming and extremely sort of like this kind of like a feeling that we are being welcomed in Vancouver, that we are like sort of in our right place of being. And we still remember that time for like very fondly, and we're really thankful for that time because it was an incredible significance. And we actually stayed for like few extra days because they went for a vacation, but we stayed in her house to look after it and to look after their dog, and which was also like very, very kind of like inspirational and welcoming period of our lives. We kind of like felt that we are needed here, that we're invited not for the higher purpose, that this is destiny calling because of the way that it was. And so we're always kind of like thankful for her for that. And then we also like on the first day when we came to Vancouver, we went to the shore, and it was this profound realization that we are in the right place where we need to be. It was that like, the spirits of Burrard Inlet of the waters, who actually, they were one of the spirits who invited us to come to this land, who summoned us, right? But they were the ones who invited us, and so we were standing on the shore of Burrard Inlet, and we just like had this understanding that we are in a place of our destiny. We are where we have to be. And not only that, right? Like once sort of we continued to leave. Russia occupied Crimea in the March of 2014. So basically, the war that was prophesied, that we talked about, began just 3 months after we moved to Vancouver, which was another sort of confirmation of our spiritual path, that we are not just like moving to Vancouver because it was like a nice place to live or something like that, or logical, but this is our destiny, and there's something very, very significant would unravel for us in this place. So this is the end of our second episode, and I'll see you in our third one.